days. Be the worst of your tomorrows.
Hey y'all, it's Auntie Ashley, the Clinical Cookout, and it is Friendly Neighborhood Therapist Friday. So, of course, I'm here to wrap up our theme this week, which was teenage terror, hormone development in our teens. So, what I want to talk to y'all about, which might not be much of a surprise, is sexual development in teenagers. Because when we're talking about hormones, we can't neglect the fact that hormones are what cause sexual changes in preteens and teenagers. So I want to demystify it, and I also want to make it something that we are able to talk about, as opposed to parents not knowing how to talk about it or not wanting to talk about it, or even worse, believing that their teenagers are not talking about it, thinking about it, and even doing it. It's best that they have an education on it, and it is best that they get that education from older people who know a little bit more. As I always say, the last thing you want is for your teenagers to be getting information from their peers who don't know any more than they do. That is not a good recipe. That is actually a recipe for disaster. So, first things first, I want us to understand that hormones, specifically sexual hormones, are the biological factors that influence gender identity and sexual orientation and all those things. So while we live in a world where some people truly believe that it is a nurture thing that decides that, and what they see and these agendas that decide things like that, that is not true completely. There are several factors involved in how a person comes to figure out who they are sexually, to include the biological factors, psychological factors, and social factors, right? So what we call that is the biopsychosocial model. All of these things factor in when a teenager is trying to discover who they are sexually. That being said, I want y'all to understand that hormones play a pivotal role in that. So while you might think that these things are choices people make and lifestyle choices, they are absolutely not. There are specific hormones known as androgens that actually play the biggest part in how teens end up identifying as far as gender goes, and their gender specific behaviors and the gender sensitive roles they take. Now, I gave you one example of a biological factor, the androgens, but as far as psychological factors, this has a lot to do with personality and temperament, as those are important psychological factors that determine a teenager's attitude towards sexuality. For example, an introverted teenager going to have a much different outlook on sexuality, and they may face difficulty approaching and responding sexually because they're already introverted. And then an example of social aspects that affect this area for teenagers would be the attitude of their parents towards sexuality, parenting style, peer relationships, and cultural influences. So all these things factor in. So we can't just say that only the social influences impact who a teenager will be, because biology plays a pivotal role. And we got to kind of stop looking at biology as this black and white thing when there are so many areas of gray. If you really into science, you know that science is definitely not always black and white. So now, the big thing, teenagers and having sex, whether it's thoughts of sex or actual sexual behaviors. We have to understand that we were teenagers once. We really do have to remember that and remember what we went through, how we felt, things we did, and know that it is developmentally appropriate and normal to feel at this stage. Puberty hits and you get flooded with so many hormones, and one of those types of hormones are your sexual hormones. So according to the National Institute of Health, adolescence, or the teenage years, that is a period during which an individual's thought, perception, as well as response gets colored sexually. That is the age to explore and understand sexuality. Sexual curiosity in adolescence leads to things like exposure to pornography, indulgence in sexual activities, and also increases the vulnerability for sexual abuse. So we can't pretend like that is not a natural, normal part of development. So just to give y'all some numbers, there was a study conducted, and over 11,000 adolescents between the ages of 18 and 27 years of age were a part of this study, and it was found that more than 90% of those lost their virginity before marriage. The virgin population is found to be younger in age, have poor physical maturity, higher body mass index, more religious inclination, and often had perceived disapproval for sex during adolescence by parents. But by late teens and early 20s, most individuals experience some form of sexual interaction, irrespective of marital status. Because adolescents acquire extensive information related to sexuality, it may be misguiding and have a significant negative impact on their sexual behaviors. Sexuality is a very complex human behavior which is largely influenced by factors such as physical appearance, psychological factors, social factors, cultural norms, and past experiences. So here's what I want to leave y'all with. Please understand that to add in a disapproval of a natural process or to add in shame to a natural process will end up being detrimental later on in life. And many of us as adults can actually attest to that, and yet we repeat the cycle and don't actually talk to our teenagers about this very important part of their life that they don't understand, that they need help knowing what is right, what is wrong, what is correct information, what is flawed information. We have to be able to give them that. So if that's hard for you, there are plenty of resources out there that you can use to help with that process. And I'll put some of those up at the end of the clip. All right, y'all. I hope y'all enjoyed this week, and I hope that we see you next week at the Clinical Cookout.